I had been planning this surprise for months. My brother, Jake, had always dreamed of having a luxury car, but he never thought he could afford one. I figured that, with his wedding approaching, it was the perfect time to make his dream come true. I knew how much he appreciated the finer things, and I wanted to give him something unforgettable. I saved up every penny, made sure the timing was right, and finally settled on the perfect car, an Aston Martin. The thought of seeing his face when he laid eyes on it kept me awake at night, and I could already picture it. He would be speechless, overwhelmed with gratitude. The day of his wedding arrived, and everything was set. The ceremony was beautiful. The sun was shining, and the garden where they held the reception was decorated like something out of a fairy tale. Guests were mingling, and I could hear laughter filling the air. As the evening went on, I couldn't help but feel a little nervous. I kept glancing over at Jake, who seemed so happy, so in the moment. Once the wedding cake was cut and the first dances were done, I signaled to the valet. It was time. I told Jake I had a special gift waiting for him outside, and his eyes lit up, full of curiosity. His bride, Emily, gave me a warm smile, clearly aware of the surprise I'd been teasing him about for weeks. I led him to the parking lot where the car was parked, the sleek, silver Aston Martin gleaming in the late afternoon light. I could see his expression change as he took in the sight. At first, it was a look of disbelief, then confusion. He stepped forward, hands in his pockets, and cocked his head to the side. I stood next to him, grinning from ear to ear. "Go ahead, get in," I encouraged him. Jake slowly walked around the car, inspecting it. I saw his lips twitch, as if he was trying to figure something out, but there was no real excitement in his eyes. He finally stopped, turned to me, and said, "That's not quite it." I froze. For a second, I didn't know if I'd heard him right. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to mask my disappointment. Jake shrugged a little, still staring at the car. It's nice, don't get me wrong. But I don't know. I was kinda expecting something different. You know me better than this." My heart sank. I had never thought it would be anything less than perfect for him. His reaction didn't make sense. Was he not impressed? Was it too much? I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, how hard I'd worked to pull this off. Yet there he stood, with barely any excitement. The awkward silence stretched between us, and I felt exposed, like I'd done something wrong. "I thought you'd love it," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. Jake turned to me then, his face softening. "I do appreciate it, truly. But honestly, I've never really cared about cars all that much. I mean, I'd take a reliable one over a fancy one any day." He paused for a moment. "You know, I was expecting a little more practical." His words hung in the air, sharp and cold. It was a punch I hadn't seen coming, and it left me reeling. All the anticipation, all the careful planning, and it was like I had missed the mark completely. "But it's an Aston Martin, man," I said, trying to hold on to the idea that this was still a good gift, that it would mean something to him. Jake sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Yeah, but I'd rather have a truck that I can actually use, you know? Something I don't have to worry about when it snows, or when I need to haul something." It stung. I had been so sure. His response felt like a deep cut I wasn't ready for. As much as I tried to shake it off, I could see that the thrill of the surprise had evaporated. Instead of a memory we'd both treasure forever, it had become a quiet disappointment. "Well, I can always sell it back," I said, trying to force a smile, but it felt like the words didn't quite fit. Jake gave me a sheepish grin. "I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, man. It's just, not me. But hey, I'll find a way to make it work, I promise." But even with that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed. It wasn't the moment I had imagined. When we went back inside, the wedding carried on, but the weight of that exchange stuck with me. I had tried to give him something extraordinary, and it hadn't landed. Still, at the end of the day, Jake was my brother, and I knew that the gift I really wanted to give him was something that couldn't be bought. The days that followed felt like a blur. I didn't want to dwell on Jake's reaction, but every time I thought about it, a sense of unease crept in. The wedding had been a success, but I kept replaying the moment in my head, wondering if I had misjudged him. I had spent so long imagining his excitement, the joy he would feel. But instead, it had all fizzled out. I gave myself a few days to cool off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to fix it. I wanted to redeem myself, to do something that would make him feel the way I had hoped he would about the car. So, I called Jake. His voice sounded light-hearted when he answered, like he hadn't been weighed down by our earlier exchange. "Hey, man," I started, trying to keep it casual. "I've been thinking. Maybe I didn't quite get the right thing for you. You still up for that truck?" Jake laughed, the sound easing some of the tension that had settled in my chest. "You don't have to do that, seriously. I wasn't trying to make you feel bad. The car's amazing, just not my style." I let out a relieved breath. I know. But if you really want a truck, I'm willing to help make that happen." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I appreciate it, but I'm good. Honestly, it's not about the car, or the truck, or any of that. It's about the fact that you even thought to do something like that. That's what counts." His words felt like a balm to my wounded pride, but there was still something unspoken, lingering in the air. "Okay," I said quietly. "I just want you to be happy, Jake." And I guess I thought the car would be the thing. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Jake sigh. "Look, I'm sorry if I didn't react the way you expected. I don't want you to feel like you messed up. It's just that. I don't know, man, sometimes we build things up so much in our heads, but at the end of the day, it's about us. And I've got everything I need with Emily and you know?" I felt a weight lifting off me as he spoke. It was like the tension in the air had finally dissipated, and the pressure I'd been carrying for days was gone. It wasn't about the car or the gift, it was about the relationship we had, the bond that no amount of money or luxury could define. "I get it," I said, the words more heartfelt than I had intended. "I guess I just wanted to give you something to show how much I care." "I know, man," Jake replied. "And I get it too. Maybe one day I'll take you up on that truck offer, but for now, let's just keep it simple, all right?" I laughed, the sound of it echoing in the quiet of my living room. "All right, deal. But you owe me a ride in that car one day." Jake chuckled. "You bet." We ended the call on a lighter note, and for the first time in days, I felt at peace. I had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the grand gestures aren't what matter most. The moments we share, the simple things, are what truly count. And while Jake might not have gotten the car he imagined, he had something far more valuable, a brother who understood him, who would always have his back. As for the car? Well, I decided to keep it. Maybe someday, Jake would be ready for it. Or maybe I would just enjoy it myself, not as a symbol of a failed surprise, but as a reminder that sometimes the best things come when you least expect them. A few weeks passed, and the whole ordeal started to fade into the background. Life went on as usual, Jake and Emily settled into their new married life, and I kept busy with work, trying to put the car situation out of my mind. I hadn't expected Jake's reaction to affect me as much as it had, but it stuck with me. I was used to being the one who knew exactly what to do, the one who could read a situation and nail it. This time, though, I felt like I had missed the mark entirely. Then, one Saturday afternoon, out of the blue, I got a call from Jake. He was quieter than usual, and his voice had a hint of something I couldn't quite place. "Hey, man. Can we talk?" he asked. "Of course, what's up?" I replied, instantly concerned. "I've been thinking about what you did with the car," he said, a little awkwardly. "And I want to apologize for how I reacted. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I was just caught off guard, you know?" I rubbed my forehead, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. You don't need to apologize, Jake. I was the one who should have understood. I guess I just got too caught up in the idea of giving you something big. Yeah, well, I don't know why I didn't just tell you this sooner, he continued. But I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about wanting to show how much you care. And honestly, man, I think I've been kind of blind to the fact that you've always been there for me. I guess I was just focused on the wrong things. I sat back, trying to absorb what he was saying. Jake wasn't the type to get deep like this. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, and it hit me, he wasn't apologizing just for the car, but for something else. Jake, I said, my voice softer now, I know you've always got my back. I just wanted to do something special for you. I thought that's what you wanted too. He was quiet for a moment, then let out a sigh. I do appreciate the gesture more than you know. And it's not about the car, or a truck, or any of that stuff. It's about us being there for each other, like we always have. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. It's funny, isn't it? How sometimes you think you're doing the right thing, but you miss the mark. We all get wrapped up in these big gestures, but it's really the little things that matter. Jake agreed, and we spent the next few minutes just talking, really talking. It wasn't about the car anymore. It wasn't about trying to fix a mistake or make up for something we didn't even have to apologize for. It was about our relationship, the bond we'd always had. I realized that in trying so hard to give him something extravagant, I had overlooked the most important thing, what really mattered to him. The next weekend, I invited Jake to go for a drive. Not in the Aston Martin, but in my old truck, the kind of truck that was practical, nothing fancy, but it had been with me through thick and thin. Jake agreed, and we spent the afternoon driving through the back roads, talking about everything and nothing. It felt like old times again. There were no expectations, no pressure. Just the road, the wind, and the simple joy of being together. By the time we got back to my place, I realized that I hadn't thought about the car once the entire day. I didn't need to impress Jake with something grand. I didn't need to prove anything. All I needed was to be there for him, the way I always had been. As we said our goodbyes, Jake gave me a grin. Next time, I'll drive the truck, and we'll see if I can keep up with you. I laughed, the weight that had been lingering over me for weeks finally lifting. You've got it, man. You can even take the Aston Martin if you want, but no promises on the speed. Jake chuckled, and we both knew that, in the end, none of that mattered. What mattered was that we were family, and no car, no gift, could change that. We had each other, and that was all we would ever need. A few months had passed since the whole car situation, and everything between Jake and me had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Life was back to normal, and there was no longer any awkwardness hanging between us. I'd let go of the disappointment I had felt over the car. It was strange how quickly things had shifted. We'd both moved on, learning something important in the process. One Saturday, Jake called me up again. This time, his voice had that familiar excitement to it, the one that always made me think something was up. Hey, man, he started, you free today? I got something to show you. I couldn't help but smile, already guessing where this was going. What's going on? You finally found that truck you wanted? He laughed, but it was a little nervous. Sort of. But I need your help with it. It's, well, I bought something new. I raised an eyebrow. New, huh? I'm intrigued. Jake went quiet for a second before he let out a sheepish laugh. I bought a car. But it's not just any car. It's a classic. And I need you to check it out for me before I drive it home. I felt my heart skip a beat. The way he said classic made me curious, and I wasn't sure whether to be nervous or excited. All right, I'm in. Where are we going? He gave me the details, and I was there in under an hour. When I pulled up to the address, I saw Jake standing next to a small garage, his hands shoved in his pockets like he was trying to hide his excitement. The moment he saw me, he grinned. "All right, come check this out," he said, leading me toward the garage. I followed him, my mind racing, trying to figure out what kind of classic he had in mind. When we reached the door, Jake swung it open, and there it was. A car unlike anything I expected, an old-school, deep red Mustang. The kind of car you saw in movies, the one everyone dreamed about owning but never actually thought they would. The paint had a slight shine to it, and the chrome trim sparkled in the sunlight. It looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line back in the 60s. I stood there, speechless, for a moment. "Wow," I finally managed to say. That's a hell of a car, Jake." Jake chuckled, clearly pleased with my reaction. "Yeah, I thought you'd like it. Took me a while to find it, but when I saw it, I knew it was the one." He went on to tell me how he'd stumbled across it at an auction, how he'd spent weeks trying to get the price down, and how, in the end, he'd finally made it happen. He was practically glowing as he talked about it. "How much did you pay for this?" I asked, my jaw still slightly dropped. Jake gave me a sly grin. "Let's just say I didn't spend nearly as much as that Aston Martin you got me. But it feels right. You know what I mean?" I couldn't help but laugh. "I see where this is going. So, after all that talk about practicality, you go and get yourself a classic car." Jake shrugged, his grin widening. "Guess I just needed to find something that felt like me, something that wasn't all about flash, but still had character. I mean, this thing's got history. And hey, it's got wheels that actually work for me." I could tell he wasn't just talking about the car. There was something deeper there, something I couldn't quite put into words. Jake had been searching for something, a way to connect with his past or maybe even with his own sense of self. This car wasn't just a luxury purchase, it was a symbol of him figuring out who he really was. "You know, I think you made the right choice," I said, walking around the Mustang, running my fingers along the smooth surface of the hood. "It's got personality. And yeah, it's definitely you." Jake grinned and nodded. "That's the plan. And hey, I figured I owe you a ride. But this time, it's my turn to drive." I laughed. "I'll take you up on that, but you better not be trying to show me up behind the wheel." He gave me a playful shove. "You can't keep up with me now, man. Trust me, this thing's got some serious power." As we spent the next hour talking about the car, driving it around the neighborhood, and just hanging out like we used to, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not just for Jake, but for us. The way we'd come full circle, from the awkwardness of that wedding day to this, him getting the car he actually wanted, me learning to just be there for him, no strings attached. It was clear that we had both grown, in different ways but in ways that mattered. And I realized that, at the end of the day, it wasn't about the car. It wasn't about the gifts or the surprises. It was about understanding each other, and accepting that sometimes the things that matter most don't come wrapped in shiny packages, they come in moments like these, when you can just be yourself. We didn't need to talk about the Aston Martin anymore. What mattered was that we'd found our way back to the simplicity of being brothers, of knowing what each other truly wanted, without all the noise. And for me, that was more than enough. A few weeks later, Jake invited me over to his place for a barbecue. It was a typical Saturday afternoon, sunny and warm, the kind of day you just had to spend outdoors. When I showed up, the smell of sizzling burgers and the sound of laughter greeted me. The entire backyard was alive with activity. Emily was setting up the table, and a few of Jake's old friends were gathered around, drinking beers and chatting. As I walked in, Jake waved me over with a huge grin on his face. "Hey, man, you made it." He was already holding a beer in his hand, and his eyes gleamed with that mischievous spark I always loved. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, giving him a quick hug. "Smells good back here." "Yeah, well, you know me. Can't go wrong with a grill and some cold drinks," he replied, handing me a beer. Come on, I'll show you what I've been working on. I followed him toward the driveway, where I saw the Mustang parked proudly in the shade. It looked even better now, the paint job gleaming under the sun. Jake had put in a lot of work on it, replacing the tires, getting the engine tuned, and even fixing up the interior. The car looked like it was ready to hit the road for a long journey. "You've been busy," I remarked, admiring the car. "Looks like you've really put your heart into it." Jake shrugged, clearly pleased with himself. "Had to, man. This car's more than just a ride to me. It's part of something bigger, you know? I've been thinking a lot about what I want out of life, what really matters. And I think I'm finally starting to get it." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the car, taking a long pull from his beer. "I mean, this car is cool and all, but it's not about the car. It's about the journey, the things you do with it, the memories you make. And I think that's what I've been missing. I spent so much time chasing after stuff I thought would make me happy. But it's these moments, man, with family, with friends, that actually count." I stood there, processing what Jake was saying. It wasn't the same guy I'd known a few years ago. He was calmer, more thoughtful, and somehow more at peace with himself. It hit me that his journey with the Mustang wasn't just about fixing up a car, it was about fixing something deeper, something that went beyond just appearances. "You're right," I said, leaning against the fence. "Sometimes we get caught up in the big stuff, the flashy things, the things we think will make us feel good. But it's really the small things that end up mattering the most." Jake nodded. "Exactly. And you know what else? I finally understand why you did what you did with the car. You weren't trying to impress me with the Aston Martin. You were just trying to show me you care. And honestly, I can't thank you enough for that." I felt a warmth spread through me at his words. It wasn't the grand gesture I had originally thought he'd want, but in the end, the intention behind it meant more than anything. We'd both learned a lot from each other. And even though it had taken a little time, we were both in a better place now. As the evening went on, we all sat around the fire pit, talking and laughing like old times. The conversations shifted from memories of high school to plans for the future. We joked about the ridiculous things we used to do, and at one point, Jake even challenged me to a race in the Mustang, though I wasn't entirely sure if I was ready to give it a try just yet. Eventually, the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a soft glow over everything. The atmosphere was peaceful, like everything had come full circle. We didn't need anything fancy, no expensive cars or extravagant gifts. All we needed was each other, and the bond we shared. I looked at Jake, who was sitting across from me with Emily by his side, both of them smiling and talking about their next adventure together. It felt like a sense of closure had settled over me. The car, the awkwardness, the disappointment, it was all in the past now. What mattered was the future, and the memories we'd keep making, one day at a time. And when the night finally wound down, I found myself thinking about how far we'd come. Life wasn't about the destination, it was about the ride. And for Jake and me, it seemed like the best part of the ride was yet to come. It had been nearly a year since Jake bought the Mustang, and things had only gotten better between us. The dust had long settled from the whole Aston Martin episode, and I had finally come to terms with the fact that I didn't need to impress him. Our bond wasn't built on grand gestures, it was built on moments, the kind that would be forever etched in my memory, whether or not they involved cars or big surprises. I visited Jake and Emily regularly, and we spent more time together than I ever had with anyone. It wasn't just because we were family. It was because we got each other now in a way that we hadn't before. We didn't need to prove anything. We knew we had each other's backs, no matter what. That evening, I was sitting on Jake's porch, watching the sunset with a cold beer in my hand. The weather was perfect, the kind of evening that made you forget all the small problems life threw at you. Jake was beside me, staring off into the distance, looking unusually quiet. "You all right?" I asked, my voice casual. Jake smiled without looking at me. Yeah, just thinking. You know, about everything that's happened. About how much we've changed. I nodded. Yeah, I've noticed. You're a different guy than the one I used to know. He chuckled softly. Maybe. But I think I'm finally starting to understand the kind of life I want. It's not about collecting things or chasing after stuff that doesn't matter. It's about being real with yourself, being present. About having moments like this. I looked over at him, feeling the weight of his words. There was a time when I thought the only way to show love was through big, flashy things. But now, I saw that love was more in the quiet moments, the subtle gestures, and the way you made people feel valued and understood. Jake stood up and walked over to his Mustang, parked just a few feet away, and leaned against it, like he always did when he needed to think. After a moment, he called out to me, his voice a bit lighter. Hey, you want to go for a ride? I've got the keys in my pocket. I smiled, standing up to join him. Sure, man. It's been a while since I've been in that thing. As we drove through the winding roads that led out of town, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The car roared beneath us, the engine purring in the way only a well-maintained classic could. The windows were down, and the cool breeze hit my face, the kind that felt like freedom. But it wasn't just the ride that felt freeing, it was the realization that we had found peace with who we were and where we were in life. We talked about everything and nothing, just like we always did. There were no expectations, no pressure. It was just us, the road, and the comfort of knowing we had each other's trust, even when the road got bumpy. After a while, we stopped at a quiet spot by a lake, the sun beginning to dip beneath the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. We sat on the hood of the Mustang, not saying much, just watching the world settle down for the night. It felt perfect, in its simplicity. You know, Jake said after a long pause, I never would have imagined that day when you gave me the car would lead to all of this. I laughed softly, looking at him. Neither would I. But I'm glad it did. I think I learned more from that moment than I ever thought possible. Jake turned his head, giving me a sincere look. Me too, man. I've learned that it's not the car or the gifts that make life worth living. It's the moments we share. The people we have in our lives. And you've always been there for me, even when I didn't realize I needed you. I didn't know what to say. The words seemed small compared to what I felt. But as the night stretched on and the stars began to appear above us, I realized that sometimes the most powerful things aren't the ones we say, they're the ones we feel. And so, as we sat there, surrounded by the quiet of the night and the hum of the world slowing down, I realized that we were no longer the people who needed flashy cars or grand gestures. We were just two brothers, with an understanding between us that didn't need to be said aloud. We had figured out what really mattered, each other, and that was more than enough. The ride had been long and filled with bumps, but I knew this was the road we were meant to travel together.